Charlotte International Airport was a whirlwind of activity that summer morning. The check-in lines twisted through the terminal like serpentine ribbons, each turn crowded with travelers navigating their way through the maze. The cacophony of conversations blended with the rhythmic hum of announcements, creating a symphony of airport life that seemed both overwhelming and exhilarating. Amid this bustling environment stood Lydia Harper, a 39-year-old black woman whose presence radiated quiet strength. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. Clutching her bag in one hand and her phone in the other, she meticulously reviewed the details of her upcoming medical conference in New York. Lydia was a highly regarded physician, celebrated for her dedication to providing free medical care to underserved communities, those who, without her intervention, would likely remain without access to essential health services. Her life, marked by accolades and respect, had been shaped by a series of personal trials that tested her resolve. The journey to this point had been fraught with obstacles, not least of which were the pervasive challenges of racism that had cast shadows over her path. Yet, these struggles had only fortified her resolve, transforming her into a tireless advocate for justice and equality. As Lydia prepared to board Flight 237 to New York, she carried with her not just the weight of her luggage, but the emotional baggage of countless battles fought and won. She greeted the flight attendant with a smile that masked a lifetime of adversity and took her place in economy class. Stowing her bag in the overhead compartment, she settled into her seat, her mind focused on the conference ahead. She looked forward to the flight as a brief respite, a momentary pause in her otherwise relentless pursuit of bettering the lives of others. But the tranquility of this anticipated break was abruptly shattered when a middle-aged white man with graying hair and a meticulously tailored suit approached her row. His displeased gaze, as he scrutinized the number on his ticket, and then shifted to Lydia, carried a weight of judgment that seemed to cut through the air. "Excuse me," he said, his voice edged with an irritation that belied a deeper unease. "That's my seat." Lydia's heart sank as she looked up at him, her confusion mirrored in her slight, apologetic smile. "Oh, I'm sorry. I must have made a mistake." She stood up to allow him access to the window seat, his exaggerated sigh of exasperation feeling like an indictment against her very presence. As she resumed her seat next to him, Lydia's attempt to ignore the discomfort that had begun to gnaw at her was a testament to her enduring grace under pressure. As the plane began its ascent, Lydia noticed that the man later identified as John Parker was growing increasingly agitated. His fidgeting, the restless shifting of his weight, and the barely concealed mutterings under his breath were like a storm gathering strength. Lydia's attempts to focus on her work and push through the mounting discomfort were increasingly thwarted by his escalating hostility. When John Parker finally spoke, his words were laced with disdain, directed not just at the airline but clearly at Lydia. "These airlines are getting worse and worse," he grumbled, his voice a mix of frustration and scorn. "There's no respect anymore. It's like anyone can sit wherever they want." Lydia's heart ached as she tried to keep her voice steady. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't quite understand what you meant." John's response was a cold, direct assault. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "People like you should know your place." A shiver of profound unease rippled through Lydia. She had faced many forms of discrimination in her life, but the directness of this encounter, in such a public space, was jarring. Her heart pounded as she struggled to maintain her composure, trying to shield herself from the sting of his words. "Sir, I'm just trying to get to my destination just like you. I don't see why we need to have this kind of conversation." John's disdain was palpable as he turned his gaze away, his mutterings fading but still carrying a clear message of exclusion. Behind them, in the row immediately behind, Derek Williams watched the interaction with a growing sense of unease. He was a 44-year-old Army veteran and civil rights activist who recognized the dangerous familiarity of the situation. Derek knew that addressing such behavior required more than mere words. It required careful, deliberate action. Yet he was also aware that remaining silent in the face of such overt bigotry could be construed as complicity. He resolved to wait for the right moment to act, understanding that sometimes standing up for justice meant choosing the precise moment to speak out. For Lydia, the flight had become a profound test of patience and resilience. Each moment stretched into an eternity as she wrestled with the hurtful echoes of John Parker's remarks, which reverberated with painful familiarity. She tried to focus on the important work that lay ahead, but the emotional weight of the encounter made it difficult. She longed for the flight to end, yearning for relief from the indignity she was enduring. What had begun as a routine journey was now a crucible, forcing Lydia to confront her strength and dignity in the face of overt disrespect. Meanwhile, Derek Williams, seated behind John Parker and Lydia Harper, felt a surge of urgency to address the unfolding situation. The plane had reached cruising altitude, and the hum of the engines provided a constant, almost oppressive background noise. Passengers began to settle in, unfastening their seat belts and preparing for a more relaxed journey. Lydia, striving to escape the mounting discomfort, opened a medical book she had brought in her carry-on. She hoped immersing herself in the text would provide a temporary distraction from the tension simmering beside her. John Parker, however, seemed unwilling to let Lydia have even this small reprieve. His gaze, sharp and unyielding, remained fixed on her with an intensity that spoke volumes. It was as if her mere presence beside him was a direct affront to his sense of entitlement. Lydia tried to ignore the oppressive weight of his hostility, but it was palpable, almost tangible in the confined space of the aircraft. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 1 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. You must be one of those who thinks you can sit anywhere just because things have changed, right? John's voice was low but filled with venomous contempt. These changes don't mean you belong in places like this. Lydia closed her book slowly, her heart pounding in her chest as she forced herself to remain composed. She met John's gaze with a calm resolve. "Sir, I don't understand why you're treating me this way. I have every right to be here just like any other passenger." John responded with a mocking laugh, his expression one of outright scorn. "Right? What right do you have to be here in the same space as me? People like you shouldn't even be allowed to travel on flights like this, let alone sit next to decent people." Lydia felt a wave of pain and anger, but she fought hard to keep her emotions in check. The cruelty of John's words was a stark reminder of the racism she had encountered throughout her life, but the directness and public nature of this encounter were uniquely distressing. She knew she needed to stay strong, but the situation was becoming increasingly unbearable. "Look," Lydia said, her voice steady but tinged with a firm edge, "I'm not here to cause any trouble. I'm just trying to get to my destination like every other passenger. If you have an issue with me, I suggest you speak to the crew and see what they can do." John's face contorted in surprise at her unyielding response, but his disdain quickly returned. "The crew? Do you think they'll care? They probably put you here just to fill some ridiculous quota. Now I'm stuck with you for the entire flight. This is absurd." Lydia took a deep breath, forcing herself to remain calm despite the turmoil churning within her. She glanced around and noticed a flight attendant passing by. With a discreet wave, she tried to catch the attendant's attention. The flight attendant approached with a professional demeanor, her smile tempered by a sharp, discerning gaze. "Is there a problem here?" she asked. Before Lydia could respond, John was quick to voice his grievances. "Yes, there is a problem. I've been seated next to this woman, and I don't think it's appropriate. I pay a lot for these flights, and I wasn't expecting to deal with this." The flight attendant's eyes flicked between Lydia, who was visibly uncomfortable, and John, recognizing the discriminatory tone in his words. "Sir, all passengers have the right to be here regardless of who they are. If there is anything we can do to improve your flight experience, we will do our best. However, we cannot and will not move someone from their seat for this reason." Lydia offered the flight attendant a silent nod of gratitude, but John's dissatisfaction was far from quelled. "So that's how it is? You're siding with her." His voice rose, drawing the attention of other passengers and escalating the situation further. Just as things seemed poised to spiral out of control, Derek Williams, who had been observing the exchange with growing concern, decided it was time to step in. He leaned forward in his seat, his voice calm yet authoritative. "Excuse me, sir. I think you should calm down. The crew has addressed your complaint. I would suggest you accept their response and move on." John turned abruptly, his surprise evident as he focused on Derek for the first time. His expression shifted from irritation to a challenge. "And who are you to tell me what to do?" he demanded, his voice dripping with disdain. Derek met John's gaze unflinchingly, and his resolve solidified. "I'm just a passenger who wants a smooth flight like everyone else here. And I believe the lady next to you deserves respect just like any other human being. If you have issues with that, maybe it's time you reflect on your attitudes." The flight attendant, visibly appreciative of Derek's intervention, turned back to John. "Sir, please calm down. Any disruptive behavior could result in action from the crew. We all want to ensure a peaceful flight for everyone." John, realizing he had no support and faced potential repercussions, huffed in frustration and turned his gaze to the window, his silence a grudging acknowledgement of the situation. Lydia felt a momentary, albeit fragile, relief as the immediate tension seemed to ease. However, she remained aware that the atmosphere was still charged, the potential for further conflict lingering in the air. Derek now settled back in his seat, kept a vigilant watch on John, and prepared to act again, if necessary, to ensure that the situation did not deteriorate further. The plane continued its journey to New York, but for Lydia, what was supposed to be a routine flight had become a crucible of resilience. Beside her, John's heavy silence was merely a reprieve, and Lydia knew that more challenges could lie ahead. Derek, steadfast and ready, remained a silent guardian, committed to ensuring that respect and justice prevailed throughout the remainder of the flight. "Do you honestly believe you're playing the hero here?" John sneered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "This is ridiculous. People like him need to learn their place. I'm sick and tired of dealing with this nonsense, and I refuse to remain silent." Derek felt a surge of indignation at John's words, but he managed to keep his composure. He knew that losing his temper would only escalate the situation. With a steady and controlled voice, Derek replied, "We all have our place, sir, and everyone's place is where they choose to be. This flight is meant for everyone, regardless of their color, background, or anything else. It's time for you to realize that the world has evolved, and you need to evolve with it." John looked at Derek with open disdain, but something in Derek's unwavering stance caused him to pause. Perhaps it was Derek's unshakable confidence, or maybe it was the growing attention from other passengers. John could sense that he was losing control over the situation. Lydia, sitting nearby, glanced at Derek with a mixture of gratitude and concern. She recognized that Derek was taking a significant risk by intervening, especially considering John's volatile reaction. Yet, at the same time, Lydia felt a sense of relief and strength in not facing this confrontation alone. "I suggest you take a moment to calm down and reconsider your actions," Derek continued firmly. "This flight will proceed whether or not you choose to cooperate. If you cannot show respect, you may need to reflect on the consequences of your behavior." John opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, the flight attendant, who had been observing the scene closely, approached once more. "Sir, all passengers must cooperate to ensure a smooth and pleasant flight for everyone," she said, her gaze fixed on John. "If this behavior persists, we will be forced to take more serious measures. Please adhere to the guidelines and show respect to your fellow passengers." John looked like he was on the brink of an outburst, but he managed to restrain himself. With a glare full of suppressed rage, he shot a final look at Derek, then shifted his gaze to Lydia. Lydia met his stare with a calm and resolute expression, her demeanor unshaken. "This isn't over," John muttered under his breath as he turned away, facing the window and signaling the end of the confrontation. Derek waited for a moment, making sure John had truly surrendered before he relaxed back into his seat. Lydia, acknowledging Derek's support, exchanged a silent but meaningful glance with him. She offered a slight smile, which Derek reciprocated with a nod. Although the immediate confrontation had subsided, the tension in the air was palpable. The other passengers who had remained silent during the altercation began to resume their activities, but the atmosphere on the plane was far from normal. The incident had left a noticeable mark, and many passengers were left wondering about the repercussions. Lydia reopened her book, her resolve strengthened by the encounter. She knew that this flight would be remembered not just by her but by everyone who had witnessed the altercation. While the tension had not completely dissipated, Lydia felt a bit more secure knowing that someone like Derek was willing to stand up for what was right alongside her. The plane continued its journey to New York, but the atmosphere on board had shifted dramatically. The discomfort was felt by everyone, even those seated farther from the scene of the incident. Whispers began to circulate through the aisles as passengers exchanged worried glances, though no one dared to address the issue directly. The oppressive silence that followed was almost as stifling as Joan's earlier insults. Lydia Harper, still seated next to John Parker, appeared visibly uncomfortable but remained steadfast. Derek Williams, having intervened on her behalf, kept a watchful eye on John, ready to react if necessary. The flight crew, attempting to maintain their routines, couldn't ignore the heightened awareness of the situation among the passengers. John, for his part, was visibly restless. He stared out the window, his jaw clenched tightly, unable to accept that his hostility had not succeeded in intimidating Lydia, Derek, or the other passengers. His frustration grew, and he fidgeted with his leg, a clear sign of his increasing agitation. "I don't understand why everyone's treating me like I'm the problem here," John muttered loudly enough for Derek and Lydia to hear, his irritation evident. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 2 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time.
Derek, upon hearing John's dismissive comment, took a deep breath, striving to maintain his composure. His voice, though steady, carried an undercurrent of emotion as he leaned forward, his gaze fixed firmly on John. "You still don't grasp the gravity of the situation, do you?" Derek said, his tone measured yet laced with an unspoken intensity. "It's not merely about what you've said. It's about what those words signify and the broader implications they represent. What's happening here transcends a simple disagreement on a flight. It's emblematic of a much larger, insidious problem that plagues our society."
Lydia glanced sideways at Derek, her heart heavy with the weight of his words. She knew deep down that he was right. Joan's overt racism was not just an isolated outburst, but a reflection of a deep-seated, systemic issue that affected countless lives. John, with his back still turned, responded with a dry, mocking laugh that felt like a cold slap in the face. "Oh, spare me the moral high ground," he sneered, bitterness dripping from his every word. "You people always come with this victimhood narrative. There's always an excuse, isn't there? This is precisely why this country is in the mess it's in." Derek's irritation was palpable, though he kept his voice steady. "Do you believe we're pretending?" Derek's eyes, filled with a mixture of sadness and frustration, bore into John. "Do you think people like Lydia or myself willingly choose to live with this kind of prejudice every day? No sane person would choose to endure such daily affronts, yet that's what you seem utterly incapable of understanding." Lydia, who had been silent until now, felt a surge of determination. She leaned forward, her voice carrying a blend of hurt and defiance. "You know, Mr. Parker," she said, using the name she had caught from the flight attendants, her voice trembling slightly but firm. "You sit here, judging what you think you know about me and people like me, yet you've never walked a day in our shoes. You've never had to face the constant struggle to prove your worth or to demand the basic respect that every human being deserves. Your ignorance is not just insulting, it's a painful reminder of how deeply entrenched this system of inequality is." John turned to face her, his eyes narrowing with a mixture of resentment and anger. "I know exactly what I'm talking about," he retorted, his voice a low, venomous growl that seemed to echo with years of bitterness. "You people are never satisfied, always wanting more. Nothing is ever enough for you." Lydia took a deep breath, her chest tightening with the effort to keep her anger in check. "What we're asking for, Mr. Parker, is nothing more than the basic human dignity that everyone deserves," she said, her voice unwavering despite the emotional weight behind her words. "We're not seeking anything beyond what is rightfully ours. If you find that to be too much, then perhaps the issue lies not with us but with your limited and distorted view of what respect truly entails." The impact of Lydia's words was immediate and profound. John fell silent, momentarily stunned by the clarity and emotional depth of her response. The sincerity in Lydia's voice and the strength of her calm demeanor seemed to penetrate the shield of indifference he had maintained. At that moment, the flight attendant approached once more, her concern evident in her expression. "Is everything all right here?" she asked, her voice firm but tinged with empathy. Before John could respond, Derek took the lead. "The situation is under control for now," Derek said, his gaze unwavering as he continued to address John. "However, it would be wise for you to understand the potential consequences if this behavior continues." The flight attendant's expression turned serious, her eyes carrying a silent warning. "Mr. Parker," she said, her tone brooking no argument, "this flight must proceed in safety and peace. Should there be any further disruptions, we will have no choice but to involve the authorities upon landing." John snorted in irritation, but his demeanor suggested he understood the seriousness of the warning. He glanced from the flight attendant to Lydia, then to Derek, before muttering something indistinct and turning his gaze back to the window. The flight attendant offered one last, sympathetic glance to Lydia and Derek, as if silently apologizing for the distress they had endured before walking away. Derek settled back into his seat, feeling a tentative sense of relief that the situation had at least been momentarily diffused. Lydia looked at him, her expression softening with gratitude. "Thank you, truly," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of her relief and appreciation. "Don't mention it," Derek replied, his voice filled with genuine compassion. "No one should have to face this kind of ordeal alone." As the flight resumed its course, the tension in the air was almost palpable, underscoring the reality that this encounter was far from over. The journey to New York continued amidst an oppressive silence, broken only by the hum of the engines and the occasional murmur of passengers. Derek Williams, though outwardly calm, felt a storm of emotions brewing within him. Recent events had stirred memories of his past experiences that had profoundly shaped his stance against injustice. Leaning back in his seat, Derek's mind wandered to his youth. He recalled growing up in a small town in Alabama, where racism was a daily reality. At school, he had been the target of relentless bullying from white boys, but those experiences had forged in him a fierce resolve to stand up against oppression. "Hey Derek, where do you think you're going?" One of the boys had taunted, a mocking grin on his face. Derek, struggling to keep his emotions in check, knew that any violent reaction would only lead to him facing consequences rather than the bullies. His heart pounded with a mix of fear and anger, but he forced himself to remain composed. "I just want to go home," Derek had replied, his voice steady despite the turmoil within him. The boys had laughed derisively. "You think you can walk around here like you're one of us?" Another boy had sneered, shoving Derek against the wall. Derek stood his ground, his eyes meeting those of the bullies with unwavering resolve. "I don't need to be like you. I just want to be treated with respect, like anyone else," Derek had declared, his voice carrying the weight of all the struggles he had faced and overcome. The boys' reaction to the unexpected response was one of profound surprise and confusion. They had approached the situation with a certain expectation of how things would unfold, assuming that their intimidating presence and aggressive behavior would crowd the other party into submission. Instead, their expectations were abruptly shattered when Derek's father appeared at the entrance of the alleyway. His imposing stature and the palpable authority he exuded struck fear into the boys, causing them to scatter like leaves in the wind. The sight of an older, authoritative figure stepping in with such a commanding presence was more than they could handle, and they fled, their bravado vanishing as quickly as it had come. Derek's father approached him with a deep, genuine concern etched into his features. He placed a steadying hand on Derek's shoulder, his voice trembling with fatherly worry as he asked, "Are you okay, son?" The simple question, filled with the depth of parental care, carried more weight than words could express. Derek, though visibly shaken, managed a nod. Yet the glint of resolve in his eyes was unmistakable. It was a moment of profound clarity for Derek, one that crystallized his determination. In that fleeting yet profound instant, Derek made a silent vow to himself. From that day forward, he would confront any form of injustice with unwavering courage, no matter the personal sacrifices it might demand. The incident had ignited a fire within him, a burning commitment to stand up against wrongdoing and to fight for what was right. As the tension on the plane continued, Lydia Harper sat beside John Parker, her discomfort evident in the way she shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Yet, despite her visible unease, her resolve remained unshaken. Derek Williams, who had bravely intervened on her behalf, remained on high alert, his eyes locked onto John with watchful vigilance. The atmosphere in the cabin was charged, every passenger acutely aware of the unfolding drama. The flight crew, though they tried to carry on with their duties, could not ignore the palpable tension that had settled over the plane like a heavy fog. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 3 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. John, consumed by his frustration, stared out of the window with clenched jaws, his irritation evident in every muscle of his body. The realization that Lydia, Derek, and the other passengers were not cowed by his aggressive demeanor only seemed to intensify his anger. He fidgeted restlessly, his agitation manifesting in the nervous, repetitive movements of his leg. His frustration bubbled over and he muttered resentfully, "I don't understand why everyone's acting like I'm the problem here." His voice, though quiet, was laden with an almost palpable bitterness, revealing the depth of his resentment and sense of injustice. Derek, maintaining his composure but with an underlying firmness, leaned forward to address John. "You still don't grasp the full picture, do you?" he said, his tone calm yet unyielding. "The issue here isn't just your words but what they signify. What you're perpetuating is part of a much larger and deeply rooted problem." Derek's voice carried the weight of his frustration and the gravity of the situation. He was not just speaking to John but challenging a broader ignorance, pushing back against a deep-seated prejudice that had, for too long, gone unchecked. Lydia, who had been quietly absorbing the exchange, felt a surge of recognition at Derek's words. She leaned slightly forward, her gaze steady as she addressed John directly. "Mr. Parker," she said, using the name she had overheard, "you sit here presuming to understand my experience. and that of people like me, but you've never lived it." Lydia's voice held a quiet strength, and her words cut through the noise of John's defensiveness. She spoke from a place of deep personal truth, sharing the harsh realities of constantly having to prove oneself and fight for respect, a basic right that should be universally granted but is often denied. John's reaction to Lydia's words was one of sharp, defensive resentment. He turned to face her, his eyes narrowed with hostility. "I know exactly what I'm talking about," he replied, his voice dropping to a lower, more venomous tone. "You people are always wanting more, always demanding more. Nothing is ever enough." His response, dripping with bitterness, revealed his unwillingness to acknowledge the depth of Lydia's experience. It was a testament to his refusal to confront his prejudices and the systemic issues they represented. Lydia took a deep breath, her struggle to control her rising anger evident in the careful control of her voice. "What we're asking for, Mr. Parker," she said firmly but with a controlled calmness, "is simply to be treated with basic human dignity. We're not asking for anything beyond what every person deserves. If that seems excessive to you, perhaps the issue lies with your limited understanding of respect." Her words were a powerful declaration of her worth and humanity, a call for recognition and respect that transcended the immediate confrontation. Lydia's response struck John with an unexpected force, her passionate yet composed demeanor forcing him to confront the uncomfortable truth of his limitations. At that moment, the flight attendant reappeared, her concern evident as she surveyed the situation. "Is everything all right here?" she asked, her tone firm yet laden with concern. Her presence was a reminder of the gravity of the situation, and her question was an implicit acknowledgement of the emotional weight of the confrontation. Before John could respond, Derek interjected, his voice steady and authoritative. "The situation is under control for now," he said, keeping his gaze fixed on John, "but it would be prudent to ensure that Mr. Parker understands the potential consequences of continued disruptive behavior." Derek's words were a clear signal that the matter was being taken seriously, and his insistence on potential consequences underscored the importance of maintaining order and respect. The flight attendant met John's gaze with a serious, unyielding expression, conveying a silent yet unmistakable warning. "Mr. Parker," she said, "this flight must continue safely and peacefully. Should there be any further disturbances, we will have no choice but to involve the authorities upon landing." Her words were a firm reminder of the seriousness of the situation, emphasizing the need for John to adhere to the standards of behavior expected on the flight. John's reaction was a mix of irritation and begrudging acknowledgement. He snorted, clearly displeased, but seemed to grasp the gravity of the situation. He glanced briefly at the flight attendant, Lydia, and Derek before muttering something inaudible and turning back to the window. His subdued response was a reluctant acceptance of the consequences he faced. The flight attendant offered one last, meaningful glance at Lydia and Derek, a silent gesture of understanding and apology for the distress caused. She then walked away, leaving Derek to lean back in his seat, feeling a temporary sense of relief. Lydia looked at Derek with a grateful smile, a silent acknowledgement of his support and bravery in the face of a challenging situation. "Thank you, really," Lydia said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, but laden with genuine gratitude. "No problem," Derek replied, his tone steady and sincere. "No one should have to go through this alone." As the plane continued its journey to New York, the atmosphere remained thick with unresolved tension. The weight of the recent confrontation lingered, and the silence among the passengers was punctuated only by the steady hum of the engine and the occasional murmur of whispers. Despite the flight's progression, it was clear that this story was far from over. Derek Williams, though outwardly calm, was deeply affected by the events unfolding around him. The situation had stirred memories of his past, a past that had shaped his resolve and determination to stand against injustice. As he leaned back in his seat, he allowed his mind to drift back to distant times where his battles had first begun. Flashback. Derek, at 14, trudged home from school, his books clutched tightly to his chest. He walked with a determined gait, avoiding eye contact with the white boys who followed him, their laughter and taunts echoing behind him. The familiar feeling of being hunted by ignorance and hatred wrapped around him like a suffocating blanket. They cornered him in a narrow alley, their faces twisted in sneers. "Hey Derek, where do you think you're going?" one of the boys jeered, his voice dripping with mockery. Derek took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of composure he had. The bubbling anger within him was intense, but he knew that any act of retaliation would only lead to more suffering for him. His response was measured, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "I just want to go home." The boys laughed, their cruelty evident in their eyes. "You think you can walk around here like you belong?" Another boy taunted, shoving Derek roughly against the wall. Derek stood his ground, meeting the boys' glares with unwavering resolve. "I don't need to be like you. I just want to be treated with respect, like anyone else." The boys were taken aback by Derek's calm defiance, their amusement fading. Just as the tension seemed ready to escalate, an authoritative figure appeared at the entrance of the alley. Derek's father, a figure of strength and dignity, stood there, his mere presence radiating a quiet power that sent the bullies scurrying away. "Are you okay, son?" Derek's father asked, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Derek nodded, his pride swelling even as his heart raced. At that moment, he understood that his father's silent support and his bravery had forged a commitment within him. From then on, he resolved to stand against injustice, no matter where or when he encountered it. Present day. Lydia, noticing Derek's distant gaze, gently pulled him back to the present. "You seem lost in thought," she said softly, her voice filled with concern. Derek's smile was faint but sincere, his eyes reflecting a deep determination. "I was just reflecting on how life is full of battles we never choose, but we have to face them anyway." Lydia nodded in understanding, her own experiences resonating with Derek's words. "I imagine you've faced many of those battles," she said. Derek's gaze was fixed on an unseen horizon. "More than I'd like to remember," he admitted, "but each one taught me something valuable. And one crucial lesson is that we can't let fear or ignorance prevent us from fighting for what's right." Lydia felt a shiver of recognition. Derek's strength and conviction were palpable, a beacon of hope amid her turmoil. Despite the challenges they faced, she felt a profound connection to Derek, united by their shared struggle for dignity and respect. "Thank you for being here," Lydia said, her voice filled with heartfelt sincerity. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Derek's smile grew, a reflection of solidarity and support. "I'll always be here, Lydia," he replied, "not just for you, but for anyone who needs it. Because that's how we make a difference." As the plane continued its course through the skies, Lydia and Derek shared a moment of mutual understanding. Their resolve to fight against injustice was renewed, and their shared commitment to stand up for what was right remained steadfast. The flight to New York, once a simple journey, had transformed into a profound reminder of the ongoing struggle for respect and equality. In the quiet aftermath of the confrontation, Lydia sat in reflective silence, absorbing the weight of the past few hours. John Parker's behavior, the harsh insults, and Derek's intervention were all swirling in her mind. As the miles flew by, Lydia knew she would need to process everything at some point. For now, however, her focus was on deciding how best to respond to the situation and continue her journey with the dignity and strength she had always upheld. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 4 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. Lydia was a woman well acquainted with adversity, both personally and professionally. As a doctor working in underserved communities, she had long been exposed to the harsh realities of prejudice and discrimination. Yet this flight presented a different kind of challenge. The public humiliation, John's contemptuous glare, and the palpable tension among the passengers made her question whether continuing to endure such indignities in silence was worth it. She glanced at Derek, who was seated beside her, and felt a profound sense of gratitude for his courageous intervention. His decision to step in was not something he was obligated to do, but he acted with bravery and decisiveness. This act of solidarity reminded her of the times when others had remained passive while she faced racist insults alone. Those experiences had taught her to be resilient, but also to internalize the pain and keep it to herself. But now something within her was shifting. Lydia felt a burgeoning strength within her, a resolve not to let Joan's venomous words define or wound her any further. She recognized that over the years she had allowed microaggressions, disdainful glances, and both implicit and explicit insults to accumulate, constructing an emotional fortress around herself. Yet Derek had demonstrated that true strength involved not only enduring but also confronting injustice. Derek seemed to sense Lydia's deep contemplation. He leaned slightly toward her and spoke in a gentle, concerned tone. "Are you okay, Lydia?" he asked, his eyes filled with empathy. Lydia sighed deeply and nodded, though her resolve was not entirely solid. "Yes, I'm fine," she replied, her voice tinged with reflection. "I'm just pondering how I arrived at this point, how I allowed so many things to affect me for so long without taking a stand." Derek's eyes softened with understanding. "You've always fought, even if it wasn't always visible, he said reassuringly. Sometimes simply moving forward is a form of resistance. Lydia mulled over his words, feeling a mix of relief and frustration. She had convinced herself that her strength lay in her silence, in not letting the insults diminish her. But now, seeing John's silent, uncomfortable presence, she knew she needed to do more than just endure. "Derek, I'm exhausted from merely moving on," she said, her voice gaining a new firmness. "I'm tired of being the person who's always strong and lets things slide. I can't continue like this." Derek's lips curved into a slight smile, recognizing the newfound determination in Lydia. "Perhaps it's time for a change," he said gently, "and you don't have to face this alone. I'm here, and many others care and will stand with you." A warm feeling spread through Lydia's chest. As she looked around the plane, she saw that many passengers were observing the situation. Some had expressions of sympathy, while others seemed to offer silent support. For the first time, Lydia felt that maybe, just maybe, she could make a difference in a way she had never attempted before. Straightening up in her seat, she took a deep breath, knowing there was something she needed to say, something that needed to be heard. "Mr. Parker," Lydia began, turning to John, who looked surprised at being directly addressed. "I want you to understand that your words were hurtful, but they haven't shattered me. I refuse to let them dictate who I am or what I can achieve." John's expression shifted from surprise to visible discomfort. He remained silent, but Lydia's unwavering gaze made it clear that she was no longer willing to be a passive victim. "You tried to belittle me, to humiliate me," Lydia continued, her voice steady and intense. "But what you've done has only given me more reasons to stand up and fight, not just for myself, but for everyone who endures attitudes like yours." The plane fell into absolute silence. Derek watched Lydia with admiration, struck by the powerful strength she was now exuding. At that moment, Lydia declared, her voice resolute and clear, "I will no longer tolerate this. My dignity and humanity are not for sale, and I will not accept being treated as if they are." John finally broke the silence, his voice hesitant and feeble. "I didn't mean to," he began, but the words trailed off, inadequate to address the magnitude of Lydia's resolve. Lydia's interruption cut through the charged atmosphere with a firmness that brooked no argument. "It doesn't matter what you meant or didn't mean," she said, her voice unwavering but resolute. "What matters is that you need to understand the impact of your words and actions. People like me will no longer stay silent." Her words echoed with a profound sense of purpose and conviction, leaving no room for misinterpretation. Derek, sitting beside her, felt a surge of pride swelling within him. Lydia's declaration was not merely a moment of personal resolve, it was a declaration of resistance that could inspire others to stand up against the injustices they faced. He realized that this was a pivotal moment, not just for Lydia, but for everyone who witnessed her bravery. Her refusal to accept silence as a response marked a turning point that could ripple outward, touching lives beyond this flight. Lydia leaned back in her seat, feeling the weight of her own words settle upon her. Instead of feeling overwhelmed, she felt a profound sense of liberation and strength. The decision to reject passivity and confront prejudice head-on had imbued her with a new sense of power and clarity. It was as if the act of speaking out had lifted a heavy burden from her shoulders, replacing it with a newfound purpose. As the flight continued its journey, it carried with it not just passengers, but a powerful message of resistance, courage, and the necessity of confronting prejudice. The tension in the plane was palpable, an almost tangible presence that hung in the air. An uncomfortable silence had settled over the cabin, punctuated only by the low hum of the engines and the occasional whisper among the passengers. Among those observing the scene was a young woman, perhaps in her 30s, with curly hair and warm brown skin. She had been quietly watching the exchange, her expression thoughtful and contemplative. Finally, she stood up, her voice trembling but infused with a fierce determination. "Excuse me, Mr. Parker," she said, her gaze steady as she faced John. "I'm Isabel Martinez and I'm Latina. I've been in similar situations to Lydia's, where I've been made to feel inferior because of my skin color or my accent. What you did was deeply hurtful, and I refuse to remain silent about it." John's discomfort grew palpable as he shifted uneasily in his seat, feeling the mounting disapproval from the other passengers. He opened his mouth to retort, but Isabel pressed on. "You have no right to treat anyone this way," she continued, her voice gaining strength with each word, "and I won't stay quiet when I see such injustice." Lydia looked at Isabel with gratitude, her heart swelling at the unexpected support. Derek, too, nodded appreciatively at Isabel, acknowledging her bravery. "Isabel is right," Derek said, rising to his feet so that everyone could see him. "We've all faced some form of discrimination, whether because of our skin color, our background, or who we are. But what happened here today is a reflection of something much larger. It's about how each of us chooses to respond when we witness injustice." The cabin fell silent once more, but this time it was a silence filled with anticipation. Another passenger, an elderly man with gray hair and a stoic demeanor, stood up. His name was George McCarthy, a World War II veteran whose eyes held a deep wisdom. "I've lived through eras of profound change," he began, his voice steady and resonant. "I fought for my country, for the principle that every person deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of who they are. What you've done, Parker, is an affront to everything we fought for." John, now visibly shrinking under the weight of collective condemnation, looked around, his confidence evaporating. He attempted to respond, but was cut off by a mother sitting in the opposite row. Holding her young child close, she spoke with a voice that was both firm and tender. "I don't want my son growing up in a world where it's acceptable to demean someone based on their skin color," she said, her eyes bright with a fierce determination. "I want him to learn to treat everyone with respect. And that begins with our actions here and now." The little boy, no older than 5, looked up at his mother, then at Lydia, his innocent eyes reflecting the gravity of the situation. He reached out a small hand towards Lydia, a gesture that was simple yet profoundly meaningful. Lydia took the child's hand, her own eyes misting with emotion. The sincerity of the child's gesture and the support of the passengers filled her with a deep sense of connection and hope. "Thank you," Lydia said, her voice choked with tears. "Thank you all for standing with me." John, now encircled by accusatory gazes, seemed to shrink further into his seat. He looked around, his face pale and stricken, realizing that the support he had hoped for was nowhere in sight. The realization of the gravity of his actions seemed to dawn on him as he muttered, "I don't know what to say," his voice lacking conviction. Derek, noticing John's increasing discomfort, moved closer to him, his tone gentler yet still firm. "It's not about what you can say right now, John," Derek said, his voice steady with quiet authority. "It's about what you choose to do from here on out. We all make mistakes, but our responses to those mistakes define who we are." John lowered his head, unable to muster a response. Isabel, still standing resolutely, addressed the other passengers. "We're all on this flight together," she said, her voice filled with earnestness. "And that's more than just a metaphor. We're all part of something larger, and real change can only come if we stand together and act with integrity." George placed a firm hand on Derek's shoulder, his eyes reflecting a deep sense of solidarity. "And that's why we stand with you, Lydia, all of us. It doesn't matter where we come from or what we look like. We will face this challenge together." Lydia, deeply moved by the outpouring of support, looked around at the faces that not long ago had been strangers but were now united in a shared moment of humanity and solidarity. "You don't know how much this means to me," Lydia said, tears glistening in her eyes. "Not just for me, but for everyone who endures this kind of prejudice daily. You're showing that we can be better, that we can be the change we want to see in the world." If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 5 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. The plane, once a cauldron of tension and conflict, now hummed with an unexpected and palpable sense of unity. The atmosphere had shifted dramatically as passengers, previously silent observers, began to rally around Lydia and Derek. What had begun as a moment of deep discomfort and injustice had evolved into an act of collective resistance and solidarity. Lydia, her hands still clasping the small boy's, felt an overwhelming sense of purpose and connection. Amid this flight to New York, a group of passengers had made a powerful decision. They would no longer remain silent in the face of wrongdoing. Their collective stand was not merely about Lydia's struggle, but about standing up for everyone who was fallen or faced similar challenges. This newfound unity among the passengers was a beacon of hope, showing that even in a world marked by division, it was possible to find strength and resolve through mutual support. John Parker, who had previously basked in a sense of entitlement and power, now found himself in an untenable position. The support Lydia received from Derek and the other passengers was a clear message that his behavior would no longer be tolerated. Once accustomed to wielding influence and authority without question, John was now confronted with a situation that defied his control. The realization that he was the outlier in this collective stand against injustice left him feeling increasingly isolated and vulnerable. As John surveyed the faces around him, the weight of their disapproval and the echoes of their words began to close in on him. The pressure was mounting, and his usual veneer of respect and control was slipping away. For someone who had always been accustomed to commanding respect and having his words go unchallenged, this reversal of roles was disorienting and unsettling. He found himself grappling with an unfamiliar sense of vulnerability and frustration as the world he knew seemed to tilt on its axis. John's gaze fell upon Lydia, who was still sitting beside him with a dignity that deeply unsettled him. Despite the harsh words and insults he had directed at her, Lydia had not faltered or submitted. Instead, she stood firm, her inner strength shining through in a way that John could neither comprehend nor dismiss. The contrast between his state of disarray and Lydia's composed resilience struck him profoundly. John began, his voice faltering and unsteady. "I don't know what to say." Lydia, who had remained silent up until now, looked at John with a mixture of sadness and understanding. She saw in him a man consumed by prejudice and hatred, struggling to see beyond his narrow perspective. "Maybe there's nothing to say, John," Lydia responded gently, her voice calm and steady. "Sometimes silence is the best place to start listening. To listen to the voices you tried to silence, the stories you never wanted to hear." Her words were a quiet invitation for reflection, a chance for John to confront the uncomfortable truths about his own beliefs and behaviors. John's gaze dropped, unable to meet Lydia's unflinching eyes. The realization that Lydia's words held a painful truth was more than he could easily accept. Admitting that he was wrong would mean acknowledging a weakness he had spent his life avoiding. For John Parker, weakness was an unacceptable state, something he had never allowed himself to experience. Derek, witnessing the interaction unfold, decided it was time to offer John a path forward. His approach was firm yet compassionate, designed to open a door rather than close it. "John, we all make mistakes," Derek said, his voice resonating with sincerity and quiet authority. "What matters now is how you choose to act. You can continue down this path, or you can choose to do something different, something better." Derek's words were a lifeline, a chance for John to redefine his actions and intentions in the face of a challenging moment. John remained silent, grappling with the weight of Derek's message. His eyes shifted from one passenger to another, noticing the silent but palpable expectation in their faces. They were not merely condemning him, they were offering him a chance to recognize his errors and seek redemption. It was a moment of collective hope, a belief that change was possible even for someone like John. After a long pause, John took a deep breath, struggling to find the words that seemed to elude him. I don't know how," he admitted, his voice cracking slightly with the strain of his emotions. I don't know how to change. His admission was a significant step, an acknowledgement of his uncertainty and the difficulty of confronting deeply ingrained prejudices. Isabel, who had been standing and watching the exchange, stepped closer to John with a gentle but encouraging demeanor. "The first step is to recognize that you have something to learn," she said softly. "The second step is to be willing to listen, for real." Isabel's words were a practical guide, a starting point for John to embark on a journey of self-improvement and understanding. John looked at Isabel, then at Lydia, and finally at Derek. In their eyes, he saw a glimmer of hope, an indication that change was possible. "I want to try," he said, his voice imbued with a mix of hesitation and earnestness. "I don't know where to start, but I want to try." His commitment, though tentative, was a sign that he was willing to take the first steps toward a different path. Lydia nodded, a sense of relief washing over her. She understood that the road to transformation was long and fraught with challenges, but this was a crucial beginning. "We're all trying," Lydia said, her voice imbued with empathy. "And you don't have to do it alone. But you need to be willing to face the truths that might be painful. It's the only way to grow." John nodded slowly, the weight of Lydia's words settling over him. He recognized the enormity of the task ahead, but also felt a glimmer of possibility. Derek placed a reassuring hand on John's shoulder, offering a gesture of solidarity. "You're not alone, John. We're all on this flight together," as Isabel said before. "And that means we're all here to learn, grow, and change. The important thing is to be willing to take the next step." John looked around at the other passengers, feeling a newfound sense of connection and responsibility. There was an air of collective support and expectation that despite the turbulence of the moment, something positive could emerge. "Thank you," John said, his voice low but sincere. "Thank you for giving me this chance." Lydia smiled gently, her expression a blend of hope and understanding. "Everyone deserves a chance, John. It's up to you what you do with it." Her words were a final encouragement, a reminder that the path to change was within his reach if he was willing to take it. The plane continued its journey, now imbued with a newfound sense of tranquility. John Parker had been confronted not only by the collective disapproval of his fellow passengers, but also by his inner reflection. He was acutely aware that the path ahead would be fraught with difficulty, but he was prepared to confront these challenges. He came to realize that this shift in perspective wasn't solely about his growth. It was also about ensuring a world where individuals like Lydia could exist with the respect and dignity they deserved. As the aircraft neared its destination, it became evident that this flight had transcended its mere function of transportation. What began as a routine trip from Charlotte to New York had evolved into a significant journey of transformation, unity, and, above all, hope. The tension and conflict that had marked the beginning of the flight were giving way to a palpable sense of resolution. The captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing the descent into LaGuardia Airport. Passengers began to prepare for landing, and while the atmosphere on board remained charged, there was a noticeable sense of relief in the air. Lydia Harper and Derek Williams, seated next to each other, exchanged meaningful glances, fully aware that the events that unfolded on the plane could not be left behind once they disembarked. "I wish I could say that all of this would disappear once we get off," Derek said, his tone reflective. "But I know it's not that simple," Lydia replied, adjusting her carry-on bag with a sense of resignation. Derek nodded in agreement, his expression one of solemn determination. "I understand, Lydia. What happened here isn't something that can be swept under the rug. We need to ensure that there are consequences." John Parker, seated a few rows ahead, remained silent since his earlier confrontation with Lydia, Derek, and the other passengers. He seemed lost in thought, as if grappling with the weight of his actions. He gazed out the window, but the approaching New York skyline appeared distant and blurred, mirroring his sense of disconnection. As the plane touched down, the reality of the situation became undeniable. The solid ground beneath them was a stark reminder that the ordeal was far from over. The aircraft came to a stop on the runway, and as passengers began to stand up and retrieve their belongings, Derek leaned toward Lydia. "Let's talk to the crew and make sure this is reported," Derek suggested, his voice low but resolute. "I agree," Lydia responded, feeling the weight of the situation heavy on her chest. "This can't go unpunished." As passengers disembarked, Derek and Lydia made a point to be among the last to leave. John, too, hesitated, sensing that something significant was about to occur. While they waited, Derek approached one of the flight attendants, a young woman with blonde hair who had attempted to calm the situation during the flight. "Excuse me," Derek began, his tone respectful yet firm. "I'd like to report the incident that occurred during the flight. There was verbal abuse from one of the passengers, and we believe it's important that this be brought to the attention of the authorities." The flight attendant, already informed about the incident, nodded with a concerned look. "We've informed the pilot of the situation, sir. Once we disembark, authorities will be waiting to speak with all involved parties," she said, glancing at Lydia and John, who was positioned behind her. "Thank you," Lydia replied, striving to maintain her composure amidst the tension. Upon exiting the plane, they were met by a team of airport police and security personnel waiting at the jet bridge. The head of security, a tall man with gray hair, approached them with a professional yet approachable demeanor. "I'm Michael Thompson, the airport security chief," he announced. "We've been informed of an incident on board. I'd like you to accompany us so we can take statements and assess the situation." John Parker, who had remained silent up to this point, appeared pale and anxious. "Is this necessary?" he asked, his voice betraying a faltering attempt at composure. "Yes, Sir," Michael Thompson replied firmly. "We have reports of a serious incident, and we must investigate thoroughly." Seeing John's growing anxiety, Derek decided to offer some reassurance. "John, this is necessary," Derek said gently. "You mentioned wanting to be better, and part of that is facing the consequences of your actions. This is an important step in that process." Lydia, standing beside Derek, observed the situation with a mixture of emotions. She recognized the need for John to be held accountable, but also felt the weight of the moment's gravity. "Let him cooperate," Lydia said finally. "It's crucial that the authorities understand what happened." If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 6 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. The group was escorted to a private room at the airport where they were separated for their statements. Lydia, as the primary victim, was the first to be interviewed. She recounted the incident in detail, from the initial insults to Derek's intervention. I just want this to be a learning experience, not just for me, but for anyone who's faced something similar, Lydia concluded. It's not only about my experience, it's about preventing future occurrences. The officer taking her statement, a woman with a serious but empathetic demeanor, nodded in understanding. We appreciate you sharing your account, Miss Harper. We will do everything in our power to ensure that justice is served. As Lydia conversed with the police, Derek provided his detailed statement. He explained his decision to intervene in the situation and the motivations driving his actions. In addition, Derek handed over a crucial piece of evidence, a recording he had made of John's derogatory remarks. This recording was expected to play a significant role in the investigation. John was then called in to provide his statement. He approached the situation with visible reluctance and anxiety, his hands quivering slightly as he began to speak. I recognize that I was wrong," John confessed, his voice wavering. "I can't explain why I acted that way. It was a mistake. I'm prepared to face whatever consequences come my way." The officer conducting the interview maintained a neutral demeanor throughout, carefully documenting John's admission. "Mr. Parker, your cooperation is crucial to ensuring a fair resolution," the officer said, maintaining a professional tone. "We will review the recording Mr. Williams provided and include it in our report." With all statements collected, Michael Thompson rejoined Lydia, Derek, and John to provide an update. "We will proceed with a thorough investigation, and Mr. Parker may be subject to formal charges," he informed them, his gaze fixed firmly on John. "The final decision will rest with the appropriate authorities, but I want to assure you that this incident will be treated with the gravity it deserves." John responded with a subdued nod, feeling a deep sense of defeat. He was acutely aware that his usual methods of evasion and influence would be ineffectual here. The weight of his actions had finally caught up with him, and he found himself facing an unavoidable reckoning. As Lydia absorbed the gravity of the situation, she glanced at Derek, who offered her a reassuring smile. "We did what was right," Derek said softly, his voice carrying a sense of quiet determination. "Now it's up to the system." "Yes, we did," Lydia concurred, her feelings a blend of relief and exhaustion as the formalities concluded. Both Lydia and Derek understood that this incident had far-reaching implications. The events on the plane had become a symbol of resistance and courage, a reality neither of them had anticipated but would carry with them indefinitely. Leaving the airport, Lydia and Derek felt the weight of the broader implications of their actions. The incident had transcended their personal experiences, reflecting larger societal issues. Lydia, a doctor committed to social causes, and Derek, a veteran and civil rights advocate, recognized this moment as a crucial opportunity to effect change. Upon arriving in New York, they each attended to their respective commitments, but Lydia's mind remained preoccupied with the aftermath. John Parker's name had already surfaced in the headlines, and the story was gaining traction on social media. It wasn't long before media inquiries began to flood in. "Lydia, we need to leverage this momentum," Derek said over the phone that night. "The media is all over this story, and it's a chance to amplify awareness." Lydia sighed, feeling the weight of responsibility settling heavily on her shoulders. She was aware that stepping into the spotlight would mean exposing herself further, but she also understood the importance of using this platform to address racism. "You're right, Derek," Lydia responded, her tone resolute. "We can't let this become just another fleeting news item. We need to ensure that there are real consequences and, more importantly, advocate for meaningful change." The following day, Lydia and Derek met with a civil rights attorney recommended by Derek. The office, located in downtown Manhattan, exuded an aura of power and resistance. The lawyer, James Rivers, was known for his effective advocacy against racial injustice. "I've read about the incident on the flight," James began as he greeted Lydia and Derek with a firm handshake. "I'm here to help. We can pursue a lawsuit against John Parker for verbal assault and emotional distress, and seek damages. We can also collaborate with the press to ensure extensive coverage of this case." Lydia, still reeling from the events, expressed her gratitude to James. "I never imagined something like this happening to me," she said with a sigh. "But now that it has, I want to make sure it serves a greater purpose. This is about more than just me, it's about all those who face similar abuse daily." Derek, seated beside her, added, "The fight against racism is ongoing, and each incident like this must be addressed with the seriousness it deserves. We have an opportunity to elevate this discussion, potentially even garner legislative support to enhance penalties for hate crimes." James acknowledged their determination with a nod. "You're right. This moment holds the potential for real change. I'll begin preparing the lawsuit documents and reach out to reliable journalists to ensure the story is accurately and widely reported. With the wheels in motion, Lydia and Derek started to grasp the full scope of their situation. Over the next few days, Lydia was inundated with media requests, and soon her story was prominently featured on major news channels. Derek, ever supportive, took an active role in advocating for justice, participating in interviews and discussions where he emphasized the need to confront racism head-on and publicly. "We cannot let racism remain hidden behind closed doors or be dismissed any longer," Derek asserted in one of his interviews. Derek addressed the situation during a live interview, making a powerful statement. "The incident involving Lydia is just one glaring example of how deeply entrenched prejudice and hatred still are in our society. We are here to ensure that these issues are addressed and rectified." The story quickly captured the attention of the international community, and John Parker's name became emblematic of intolerance and bigotry. As a result, numerous companies began severing ties with him, and several of his lucrative contracts were canceled. John, who had always taken pride in his influential position, was now facing severe public censure. In stark contrast, Lydia found herself the recipient of an outpouring of global support. Messages of encouragement and solidarity flooded in, many from individuals sharing their own experiences of racism. Lydia realized that her voice had evolved into a beacon of hope and strength for those grappling with their struggles against discrimination. One afternoon, as Lydia was at her apartment, her phone rang. The caller ID displayed an unexpected name, John Parker. She hesitated, her emotions a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts, but ultimately chose to answer the call. "Lydia." John's voice trembled with palpable remorse. "I know I can't undo what I've done, but I want to offer a genuine apology. I can't explain what drove me to behave that way, but I recognize it was wrong. I'm prepared to face whatever consequences arise from my actions." Lydia listened quietly, grappling with a complex array of feelings. A part of her felt a desire to extend forgiveness, yet another part knew that forgiveness alone could not alter the reality of what had transpired. "John," Lydia finally said, her voice steady but firm, "it's not just me you need to apologize to. You owe an apology to all the individuals you have hurt with your actions and your prejudice. An apology is a start, but it's not sufficient. You need to do more than just say sorry. You need to demonstrate real change." If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 7 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. John remained silent on the other end of the line, but Lydia could hear his heavy breathing, a sign of his internal struggle. "I'll try, Lydia. I promise I will try," he responded, his tone imbued with what seemed like genuine intent. Lydia ended the call with a sense of relief mixed with a sober realization. She understood that this was just the beginning of a much longer journey. For genuine change to take place, it would require more than mere words. It would necessitate a profound transformation in John and a broader shift within society. As she gazed out the window of her New York apartment, Lydia felt a renewed resolve growing within her. She was prepared to continue fighting alongside Derek and all those who aspired to a future defined by justice and equality. In the following month, the ripple effects of the flight incident were profound. Lydia Harper and Derek Williams emerged as powerful symbols of resistance against racism, while John Parker faced significant repercussions for his actions. The case garnered extensive media coverage and ignited a wider discourse on racism and justice. Lydia's schedule was inundated with commitments and interviews, making it challenging for her to balance her personal life with her professional responsibilities. Despite the media frenzy, she remained dedicated to her work as a doctor and her philanthropic endeavors, though her office was frequently overrun with journalists seeking statements or updates on the case. One afternoon at her clinic, Lydia received an unexpected call from James Rivers, her lawyer. "Lydia, do you have a moment to talk?" James inquired, his voice carrying a note of gravity. "Of course, James. What's going on?" Lydia asked, her stomach tightening with apprehension. "John Parker's trial is drawing near, and there are some crucial updates," James began. "The impact of your story has been far-reaching, far beyond what we anticipated. You've become a powerful voice for those who face discrimination." Lydia managed a smile, tinged with concern. "I just hope this leads to meaningful change," she replied. "What else should we know?" "John is facing numerous consequences," James explained. "His company is being sued for his conduct, and several major contracts have been canceled. He's under intense pressure to issue a public apology and undergo sensitivity training on racism. Lydia sighed, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and fatigue. "And how is this affecting the trial?" she asked. "Is the case being handled properly?" "The media is extensively covering the case, and the court is treating it with the seriousness it warrants. However, we need to remain vigilant to ensure that justice is served effectively. Your ongoing involvement and support will be crucial," James responded. Lydia agreed, resolute in her determination to see the process through. "I'll be there. This can't be just another headline. This must lead to substantial, lasting change." Meanwhile, John Parker was confronting the reality of his actions. His legal team attempted to negotiate a settlement, but the public outcry was overwhelming. To mitigate the damage, John decided to make a public statement. During a press conference arranged by his lawyers, John appeared visibly anxious. He addressed the media with a tone of deep regret. "I want to start by offering my sincerest apologies to Lydia Harper and everyone affected by my words and actions," John said, his voice quivering. "My behavior was unacceptable, and I am profoundly sorry. I am committed to participating in sensitivity and re-education programs on racism, and I will strive to make amends." Reporters bombarded him with questions, but John remained focused on his message of apology. Lydia watched the statement unfold on her clinic's television, feeling a complex blend of accomplishment and skepticism. Later, Lydia and Derek met at a cozy, bustling cafe to discuss their next steps. Derek, visibly excited, sipped his coffee but wore a thoughtful expression. John's statement was a good start, but I'm wondering if it will truly lead to lasting change, he mused, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly. Lydia leaned forward, her gaze steady. "It's a step in the right direction," she replied. "John is facing the consequences of his actions, and that's significant. But what's even more crucial is that the system continues to handle these cases with seriousness and that we ensure others learn from this experience." Derek nodded thoughtfully. "I agree with you. It's vital that we not only address this incident but also continue to support and empower those who face discrimination. Our fight for justice can't end here." Lydia's smile broadened as she appreciated Derek's steadfast support. "We need to stay committed and make sure that our story isn't just an isolated example. It must be a catalyst for broader, meaningful change." Derek's expression softened with a look of satisfaction at Lydia's determination. "Absolutely. And we'll use every opportunity to leverage our platform for creating real, lasting impact." As they discussed their plans, Lydia's phone buzzed with a new message. She glanced at the screen and saw an invitation from a prominent civil rights organization, inviting her to speak at an upcoming event on racism and justice. Excited, she shared the news with Derek. "This could be a great chance for us to amplify our message even more," Lydia said, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. Derek agreed, a supportive nod signaling his encouragement. "That's fantastic news. It's an opportunity for your voice and our shared message to reach a larger audience." That night, John Parker retreated to his home, feeling the weight of his public humiliation. Exhausted, he reflected on the personal and professional damage he had endured. Despite the setback, a sliver of hope remained that by confronting his mistakes and seeking redemption, he might find a path to personal transformation. Meanwhile, Lydia and Derek were gearing up for the next significant step in their journey. They recognized the progress they had made but were keenly aware that the fight for justice and equality was far from complete. They aimed to ensure that Lydia's story served not only as an inspiration but also as a driving force for meaningful societal change. With spring in full bloom in New York, Lydia was preparing for a momentous event, a recognition ceremony celebrating her work and resilience in combating racism. She had been honored with an award from a civil rights organization, and the ceremony was set to take place in a prestigious downtown venue. On the morning of the event, Lydia and Derek stood backstage, their excitement palpable. Derek looked at Lydia with an encouraging smile. "Lydia, are you ready for this?" he asked. "You've done an incredible job, and you deserve this recognition." Lydia, though a bit nervous, smiled. "I'm excited but also a little anxious. This award represents so much more than personal achievement. It's about using this platform to inspire others to continue the fight against racism." Derek nodded in agreement. "Remember, change doesn't happen overnight. Every step, every story shared, contributes to the greater movement." The event commenced with a stirring opening speech from one of the leaders of the civil rights organization. The hall was filled with supporters, activists, and individuals dedicated to social change. Lydia, dressed in an elegant dark blue gown, felt a blend of nerves and gratitude as she prepared to take the stage. When her turn came, Lydia took a deep breath and approached the microphone. The audience fell silent, their attention focused on her as the stage lights cast a warm glow on her face, highlighting the determination in her eyes. "Good evening, everyone," Lydia began, her voice steady and clear. "I want to express my heartfelt gratitude to the organization for this honor. However, I want to take this moment to remind us that the fight against racism is an ongoing battle. The incident I experienced on that flight was a painful reminder of the prejudice that still exists in our society, but it also serves as a call to action." The audience listened intently, many nodding in agreement. Lydia continued, underscoring the importance of confronting racism and striving for equality. "It's crucial that we, as a society, stand up against injustice whether or not we are directly affected. We must work towards a world where every child and adult is treated with respect and dignity, regardless of their skin color." If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 8 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. After her speech, Lydia received the award to enthusiastic applause from the audience. Derek was by her side, offering an encouraging hug. "You were incredible," Lydia, Derek said. "Your speech was powerful and truly resonated with many." "Thank you," Derek, Lydia replied, her smile reflecting both exhaustion and gratitude. "And thank you for being my rock throughout this journey. I couldn't have faced all of this without your unwavering support." As the ceremony continued, Lydia had the opportunity to engage with various activists and community leaders. She shared her experiences and listened to inspiring stories from others who were also fighting against injustice. The evening was not only a celebration of her achievements, but also a tribute to the collective progress in the civil rights movement. Later, as the event came to a close, Lydia and Derek strolled through the vibrant, illuminated streets of the city. The night air was filled with a palpable sense of positive energy and possibility. Lydia, still basking in the afterglow of the evening's success, felt a profound sense of accomplishment and hope. "Look," Lydia, Derek said, gesturing toward the horizon where the city lights shimmered against the dark sky. "The city seems different tonight, don't you think?" Lydia took in the view, her eyes reflecting the gleaming lights. "Yes," she replied with a thoughtful nod. "It feels more promising, like we're on the brink of a new chapter. There's a renewed sense of hope and a deeper commitment to justice." Derek smiled, his expression one of agreement. "Exactly. Despite the challenges that lie ahead, we can see that our efforts are making a difference. That's what counts." As they continued walking, Lydia's mind wandered back to the evening's events. John Parker had faced the consequences of his actions and was now seeking personal change. Yet Lydia understood that the true measure of progress would come from sustained efforts and a steadfast commitment to promoting equality. Upon reaching Lydia's apartment, the pair prepared to wind down from the day's events. Just as Lydia was about to retire for the night, her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from John Parker, requesting a meeting to discuss potential collaboration on social justice initiatives and anti-racism education. Lydia read the message with a mixture of skepticism and cautious optimism. She was aware that real change required more than just words. It demanded genuine actions and a steadfast commitment to transformation. "Derek, take a look at this," Lydia said, showing him the message. "John is asking to meet and discuss how he can contribute." Derek scanned the message and then turned to Lydia, a thoughtful look on his face. "It's a sign that he might be trying to make amends," he said. "If he's truly committed to change, there might be an opportunity for us to collaborate and drive meaningful progress together." Lydia nodded, her resolve firm. She was determined to evaluate John's sincerity and commitment carefully. The journey towards reconciliation and personal transformation was undoubtedly long and complex, but she was prepared to take a cautious step forward, hopeful that it could lead to something positive. As Lydia turned off the light and settled into bed, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment and hope. The road to justice and equality was still challenging, but each step forward was a move toward a more just and equitable future. With renewed determination and an optimistic outlook, Lydia Harper and Derek Williams were ready to continue their journey, dedicated to inspiring change and fostering a society where everyone was treated with dignity and respect. Thanks for watching. We've just witnessed a powerful and emotional encounter that highlights the ongoing struggles with discrimination and the importance of standing up for respect and dignity. What have you learned from this story? Reflecting on these moments, how can you apply these lessons to your own life? Share one thing you've learned and plan to practice in the comments below. If you like this video, please leave your comment. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more content that inspires and challenges us to grow. Your support means the world to us.